What if I told you that an entire, massive, ancient metropolis wasn't just defeated in battle, but was completely erased from the map? And I don't mean by a natural disaster like an earthquake or a volcano. No, this was a deliberate, brutal act of human will, designed specifically to ensure that absolutely no one could ever rebuild it. Ever. Welcome to this explainer.
So, right off the bat, we run into the core mystery of our explainer today. Why erase a city forever? Think about it. Usually when we talk about ancient cities falling, they're conquered, sacked, and then eventually absorbed into whoever's new empire just rolled into town. That's just the standard operating procedure for a conquering army, right? You take the city and then you use its resources for yourself. But to permanently destroy it? To essentially salt the earth and make sure it stays a wasteland for centuries? Why would a victorious army choose to permanently obliterate absolute prime real estate rather than just claiming it as their own?
Let's get into Section 1, an erased ancient metropolis.
Okay, let's dive into this. The desolate ruins and this incredible story of ancient erasure we're investigating today belong to the famous city of Jericho. And as you'll see, Jericho was treated very differently than your average conquered city. It wasn't just defeated, it was completely annihilated. The biblical account, which is found in the book of Joshua, describes the destruction so incredibly systematic and so absolutely complete that its entire purpose was to serve as a permanent monument to divine judgment. So this wasn't standard military conquest at all. This was an absolute obliteration meant to leave a very loud message. And honestly, the truly chilling part about this message, it worked.
Section 2. The Gateway to Conquest.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of this destruction, we first need to look at the motive, or actually the complete lack of a conventional one. Look, Jericho wasn't just some random, insignificant village out in the middle of nowhere. It was armed with unbelievable strategic assets. It was sitting right inside a super fertile oasis. It had direct proximity to the Jordan River. It controlled absolutely crucial trade routes, and it provided essential access up into the highlands. Geographically speaking, Jericho was literally the ultimate gateway city into the Promised Land.
The stakes couldn't have been any higher, which brings us to a really massive paradox here. Losing Jericho meant losing control of the entire region. So, logically, a conqueror would absolutely want to keep this prime real estate perfectly intact to solidify their own power base, right? To destroy it completely goes against literally every conventional rule of ancient warfare and strategic planning. Which brings us to Section 3, Annihilation and the Curse. So if military logic says, hey, let's keep the heavily fortified oasis city, what actually drove its destruction? Well, we kind of have to shift our perspective here and look at the psychological weapon used against Jericho. Let's briefly recap the most famous part of the story. The biblical narrative from the book of Joshua outlines a highly unconventional siege. You have the Israelites marching around the formidable walls of the city for 7 days. Priests are blowing trumpets. And then finally on the 7th day, a massive shout goes up, causing those massive walls to completely collapse. Now, while the historical and archaeological debates around the exact specifics of this chaotic event are pretty complex, the final outcome is absolutely undeniable. Utter, total destruction.
But here's the thing, the physical destruction was only the beginning. Joshua says, "Cursed be the man who undertakes to rebuild this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son will he lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest will he set up its gates." Now that wasn't just some casual heat-of-the-moment trash talk. This was a solemn oath, a divinely sanctioned curse promising unimaginable, horrific personal tragedy to anyone who even dared to try and rebuild the city. This chilling pronouncement right here is the crucial turning point of our whole historical mystery.
Let's look at the hard proof in Section 4, the archaeological evidence.
Now, what's really interesting here is that we don't just have to take the ancient texts at their word. We can actually look at the physical proof left behind at the crime scene itself. The ancient site of Jericho is known today as Tel es Sultan, and the excavations they've done there, they are fascinating. Archaeologists have found crystal clear evidence of massive destruction. I mean, we're talking about thick layers of scorched earth and evidence of an insanely intense fire that dates back to right around the estimated time of Joshua. So the dirt itself actually verifies the historical accounts of a systematic, fiery obliteration.
And all this physical evidence builds into this incredible looming chronological void. We start with the total destruction at the time of Joshua, right? But look at the following centuries. There is minimal to no occupation at the original strategic core of the city. Those layers of destruction are just left sitting there untouched. Even centuries later, down in the 1st century BCE, You have Herod the Great, a guy famous for his massive building projects, constructing a lavish palace complex in the area. But guess what? He builds it nearby, in the fertile plain, strictly and carefully avoiding the cursed ground of the original site. It's almost like the land itself refused to be re-inhabited.
Section 5. The ultimate psychological weapon.
This brings us to our final act. We really need to understand the lasting aftermath of this event, and why a spoken curse proved to be so incredibly, undeniably successful for thousands of years. Just think of the heavy-hitting empires that swept through this exact area. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Fast forward through history, and all of these massive, powerful military forces marched right through this region. They fortified strategic points and built countless new centers of power everywhere else on the map. Yet every single one of them marched right past the prime real estate of original Jericho. That original, incredibly powerful city just remained an untouched ghost.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of psychological deterrence. That ancient curse served as the ultimate deterrent. It wasn't just about the immediate fear of divine retribution. It was about establishing a lasting legacy of fear. It was a threat so deeply severe that it prevented any adversary, literally no matter how massive or powerful their army was, from taking the specific action of rebuilding that gateway city.
To truly understand the power of this deterrence, just imagine for a second that you're a future king or a Roman general. You're standing there, looking at the ruins. You know exactly how much strategic value that spot has. On one hand, resurrecting Jericho would be a massive engineering triumph for your legacy. But on the other hand, it would be an act of outright, blatant defiance against a deeply, deeply held belief system. You wouldn't just be risking divine wrath. You'd be inviting the absolute terror and superstition of your own troops and all the surrounding populations. It was a warning etched into stone and story that basically kept everyone away for good.
Ultimately, the original city, the one with those famous, formidable walls that was so systematically obliterated, became exactly what it was always intended to be, a permanent scar on the landscape. It was transformed from a bustling, incredibly vital metropolis into a stark physical monument to finality. The absolute erasure of Jericho worked exactly as intended, proving that sometimes psychological warfare is far, far more enduring than physical walls could ever be.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If a major, strategically vital metropolis like Jericho can be completely erased and left as an untouched ghost town by the sheer power of human will and a terrifying curse, well, what other ancient ghosts are hiding in plain sight across our history? What other ruins did ancient empires purposefully ignore because they were too terrified to touch them? It's definitely something to think about the next time you're looking at a map of the ancient world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history beneath your feet.